operator, Sarah Page. She screams.
The clerk from a nearby store comes to her rescue, and Dick Rowland did what any normal African American would have done. He ran, and he ran to Greenwood. Before the day was over, he was arrested and brought to the county jail, which, of course, is on the south side of the tracks in the midst of the white business district.
The Tulsa Tribune published an article entitled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator."
The newspaper, the white newspapers, implies that there needs to be a lynching tonight. And so Black World War I veterans come down to the courthouse to protect this young man from being lynched.
One of the white men in the crowd attempts to disarm one of the, we believe, Black veterans. A shot is fired, it hits a white bystander, and they began firing upon the Black men.
In the words of a number of survivors of the massacre, all hell broke loose after that. The violence lasted roughly 16 hours. Black men in the Greenwood community put up a vigorous, albeit short-lived, defense. They were outnumbered, outgunned.
The sheriff has deputized a number of white citizens who have no training in law enforcement, mob control. They have now been given legal permission to participate in mayhem, looting and murdering.
Some of the people in the Greenwood community had fine things like pianos and china and so forth.
I saw them break in people's houses and just destructive. That's all I saw, just destruction.
And it was given notice out on the street, leave town, they're killing all of the Black people.
My mother looked out the front door and she saw 4 men with torches walking from the street sidewalk to our house. And all of a sudden, she says, all of you get up under the bed, quick, quick. And all of us scrambled. They came in and set fire to the curtains. And one stepped on my fingers, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to be sure to stop me, because she could tell I was fixing to holler because it hurt.
People are shooting guns and killing people and all. If we don't leave, they'll do us that way.
Many eyewitnesses report that planes dropped what I'll call incendiary devices on the community. So these would have been nitroglycerin or kerosene bombs that caused the flames to spread more rapidly and burn more brilliantly. So this had a devastating impact on the community.
Men came in and started shooting in. I do remember a lot of people being murdered.
These people escape their homes. Some are shot down in the street, and others are gathered by the white mob and marched, in my grandfather's case, to the convention hall.
They were stripped of their civil rights. Black men, women, and children were forced to leave their homes, and they are forced, with their hands raised, to walk, to be paraded through the streets.
Taken to internment centers throughout the city, very much like people of Japanese ancestry were interned during World War II.
I would say it's not just a massacre. This was intentional and systematic. What occurred is a military-style assault on a civilian community.
Do you think about that day a lot, or do you try never to think about it?
Oh, no, I think about it every day. I think it'll be something I'll never forget. The people getting killed and had to give up our home and all. And
I want the world to know I never want to see anything else like that anymore, and I hope it never happens again.
The destruction of Greenwood left behind rubble and ashes in its wake, but it also caused harm to generations of descendants who lost more than their ancestors and material wealth. They lost a legacy of success that is hard to imagine or quantify.
My earliest memory of hearing about the Dreamland Theater was in high school when my mother mentioned it to me. And it wasn't like she talked in depth about what happened. It was our family owned the Dreamland Theater. They were the first Black Tulsans to have a car, but how they lost everything was never really discussed. I'm Danya Backus, a CBS News correspondent and descendant of Black Wall Street. My great-great-grandparents, John and Lula Williams, owned the Dreamland Theater, the Williams Confectionery, and an auto garage. John and Lula Williams were the picture of the American dream. The Dreamland Theater was a 750-seat theater, and it did not just show silent movies, but apparently it had acts, they had boxing matches. My great-great-grandmother Lula actually had 2 other locations. So the Dreamland Theater was this entertainment hub for Tulsa, but it also was, I think, the beginning of an empire.
My name is John Rogers Jr. I'm the co-CEO of Ariel Investments. My ties to Tulsa start with the fact that my great-grandfather, J.B. Stratford, owned the Stratford Hotel that was burned down during the famous Tulsa Race Massacre 100 years ago. J.B. Stratford was an extraordinary entrepreneur, someone who had this knack of building businesses and creating enormous wealth. The Stratford Hotel at its peak was the largest African-American owned hotel in the United States. Not only did it have this 54-room hotel that was very large for its time, but it had a pool hall, it had a cabaret, it had restaurants.
I'm Danya Backus in Tulsa, Oklahoma, uncovering the history of Black Wall Street.
To know that I am a part of this history and I'm able to tell the story, it has taken on a new meaning and responsibility for me.
This is where the Dreamland Theater was,
yeah, right here.
And now it's a freeway.
Even now, as I talk to elders of the family about what happened, even cousins who grew up in Tulsa, many of them are now just starting to put together all of the pieces.
This is the pillar that pays homage to our family, the W.D. Williams.
And when you ask, why wasn't it talked about? Many of them don't know.
This is David Williams here.
The assumption is that it was just too painful to relive those memories. My great-grandfather, he did talk about it in the community, and he was one of the first survivors to be interviewed.
Woke up the next morning, all this shooting started over. You remember getting shot at when you ran across the street? Oh yeah, you could hear bullets singing down the street. Okay.
Hearing that firsthand, it hit me in a way that reading about it is one thing, but I think when you actually hear it, and you hear it from someone who you know is a part of your family, it impacts you differently.
My great-grandfather talks about, in his memoir, what really happened that day. He said, I was sitting in the window of the lobby looking westward. I saw an airplane approaching the hotel from the west. It came sailing like a huge bird in the direction of the hotel about 200 feet above the ground. And just before it reached the hotel, it swerved a little and fired through the transoms and plate windows. J.B. Stratford not only lost all of the property that he owned and the Stratford Hotel, but I think most importantly, psychologically, and I understand this as an entrepreneur, he'd put his heart and soul into that hotel. And to see it destroyed overnight was just gut-wrenching. And when he came to Chicago afterwards, he had these dreams of trying to recreate his success that he'd had in Tulsa. And to be able to build a new hotel and build new pool halls and have things that are successful. And he never was able to remotely achieve the success that he had in Tulsa.
W.D. Williams, my great-grandfather, talks about sleeping in a tent for about 6 months until they actually started rebuilding. The Dreamland Theater was rebuilt. The Williams building where the confectionery and where they lived, that was rebuilt. In order for them to be able to rebuild the Dreamland Theater on Black Wall Street, they had to basically sell the other two theaters. So they were able to rebuild, but it was never what it was pre the massacre. Hatred and jealousy wiped away our family's chance of generational wealth.
Can you
I
hear
could
me
have
now?
been an heir to an empire, and that was all wiped away.
I'm in the investment business and understand the magic of compound interest. That $125,000 hotel and the property that J.B. Stratford had in 1921, 100 years later, it would be worth well over $100 million. Broadly speaking, it would have been transformative for opportunities in our family.
Picking up what?
Multi-generational wealth in the African-American community. We haven't had that chance to be able to leave inheritances and have family members living off of the dividends of the work that their ancestors accomplished.
It makes me angry.
I thank you for a treat tonight for what you're going to hear and understand. Check 1, 2. All right, that sounds really good. Let's go ahead and get a level on mics on the stage as well. Okay, they're hot. All right. That's a technical term meaning their own, not really the weather. All right. Hey, my name is Michael Land. I am your MC for the evening, and I am so happy that each of you are here today and just want to welcome you to an event that is unlike any other event that I've ever seen since I've been going back and forth to Tulsa, Oklahoma. My wife is from Tulsa, and the first thing that I asked her when I first went to Tulsa is take me to this place that they kept calling Black Wall Street. And it's very, very interesting. There's not much of it left as opposed to what you've seen on the film here while we were waiting to start. But it is thriving and it is getting back to what it used to be. Thank God for that. But anyway, I want to say thanks again for coming out, and we're going to start this program this evening. And the first person that we're going to introduce you to is one of the local journalists here, Miss Yolanda Williams. I've known her for quite a while. I've nicknamed her baby girl because she's like my baby sister, such and such. You know how we do things here. But I want to just read just a little few facts about her as we introduce her, and then we're going to show a reel that we call a sizzler, and then we're going to bring her to the stage. Yolanda Williams, she's the daughter of Mr. Johnny Williams and Miss Tobazina Williams. And Miss Tobazina Williams was also a faithful member of this church until she passed away in 2019. Yolanda Williams is also a broadcast journalist for the Dallas-Fort Worth station CW33. She's also an East Texas native, and she graduated from Booker T. Washington Performing and Video Arts High School. She made her first professional theatrical stage debut on the Norma Young Arena stage at Theater 3. Her most recognizable work has been films like RoboCop, Friday Night Lights, and the blues documentary, Can You Hear the Wind Howl? The Life and Music of Robert Johnson, where she served as one of the producers of that as well. She's also contributed a lot to Newsfix, which is also one of the features of CW33, and helped them win an award with Dallas Magazine in 2017. She has a TV show called Fun on the Run, which is seen Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. At this time, we're going to show you a short film about Yolanda Williams.
affiliated with one of the most iconic rock bands from the 1970s. They've sold over 40 million albums, and they're on tour as we speak. I'm talking about the one and only Toto.
I hear the drums echoing tonight, but she hears only whispers of some quiet conversation.
Can you guess who I am? I'm Tina Turner. You're not. My goodness. What in the macaroni and cheese is going on here? Oh my gosh. You gotta be in good shape to do this. Wow. My goodness. It's crazy.
Hey friends, it's Karamo, and you're watching Fun on the Run with my girl Yolanda. Ow! It's so good!
Russell, thank you so much for inviting us to Texture Farm. Oh, well, hello. Good morning. How are you? As we can see, we've got friends amongst us here.
And this is Peaches.
Hi, Peaches.
Peaches is 1.5 years.
Is Peaches driving right now?
No.
She should be.
So when I'm dating on, y'all gonna pull all this out and laugh at it again? Well, you should.
I was gonna laugh at while you still alive.
I know that's right.
Mama passed away at the age of 80 in 2019. We still get so many messages from her past students and colleagues on how she made such a huge impact in their lives and how she taught them how to read music and play the piano. So we decided to create a website so everyone could continue to post tributes to her memory. If you would like to see more pictures and videos of my mom's wonderful life, please visit TovaZinaBrownWilliams.com.
I absolutely admire your journey and where you've come from. I just recently found out that you and I are both from Marshall, Texas.
We're practically kissing cousins.
Yes, we are. We are East Texans, and that is just fantastic. Ms. Opal, thank you so much for making time for me today. I'm just too tickled. I didn't know I was going to be laughing this much. But I just want to let you know we love you. Thank you for everything that you've done.
1, 2, here we go. Is that you, Sister Yolanda, on the front row? It might be. Okay, well, why don't you move? Move on down, move on down, move on down. Yeah, move on down. It might be too high.
Can you still dance? Can you show me a couple of dance moves? Just like a couple. Oh, ooh, whoa. Work it out. Hey, oh, a spin. Oh, wait a minute. She's got moves. Wait a minute. All of you got moves too? Wait a minute. I didn't know. Maybe we should have had a DJ or something here. Maybe that's what we'll do next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Yolanda Williams. Welcome to the stage.
Everybody. Is this on? Okay. I'll do this one. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is like being at home today. Thank you for joining us. We are about to highlight someone even more special. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, but we're going to put the focus back on why we're here today. Victor Luckerson. He is Luckerson. There we go. Victor is the author of the new book, Built from the Fire, this epic story of Tulsa's Greenwood District, America's Black Wall Street. Victor is an award-winning journalist who has written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, Smithsonian Magazine, and Time Magazine. His new book has been called outstanding by the New York Times and exceptional by the Washington Post. I had the pleasure of reading portions of this book. I would advise everyone to really take the opportunity to learn more about Tulsa. He has shared his research on Greenwood, on Joy Reid's The Readout, Morning Joe, and at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Victor resides in Tulsa, where he's had the pleasure of meeting many Greenwood residents and descendants, including members of the Christopher family. We'd like to run a video featuring some of Victor's work. Yes? Okay.
Yolanda Williams. Join author and journalist Victor Luckerson to discuss his book, Built from the Fire, the story of Tulsa's Greenwood District.
A new book called Built from the Fire describes what led to the destruction and rebirth of Black Wall Street.
News on 6's Autumn Bracey joins us now live with more on the author. Autumn?
Dave and Leanne, Victor Luckerson says this project has been about 5 years in the making. About 3 years ago, he moved here to Tulsa to tell the community's history. Luckerson says it's by spending a lot of time with descendants of Greenwood he was able to capture the true narrative of Black Wall Street. He also went through archival documents and Red Cross reports to learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, he hopes his book helps inspire the next generation to help keep fighting for justice. He says none of this would have been possible without working with descendants of Greenwood, including the Goodwin and Williams families.
What did you learn when you spoke to some of the community's current residents? And what do you make of how people are finally understanding what took place in one of the most notorious acts of mob violence against the Black community in American history?
You know, Jim, I think every single person, when they learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre, the idea that this thriving community could have been laid to waste, 35 square blocks destroyed, up to 300 people killed. When people hear that, the first thing they say is, how did I not know about this?
Yeah.
And so it's so important for me as a young journalist to travel to this community, embed myself there, and really try to tell this story in an in-depth way. You know, it's really important for people to understand that though the Tulsa Race Massacre was a horrific event, Greenwood cannot only be defined by its trauma and only be defined by those 2 days. So this story that I put together really captures that community over the course of more than 100 years.
And Greenwood represented the kinds of communities that Blacks had done on their own and was handling on their own. Talk about that, Victor. I can't wait to read your book on it.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton. And that really is one of the main things I wanted to highlight when I wrote this story. You know, I'm a young Black man from Alabama, and when I was growing up, so many of the stories that we were told about our history only centered on Black trauma. Black people being enslaved during the Civil War, being beaten and hosed by dogs during the Civil Rights Movement. But Greenwood is more than just its trauma. You know, I just actually finished writing a story for the New York Times about W.E.B. Du Bois' admiration for Greenwood. Du Bois, a great sociologist, was also an economist. He visited Greenwood actually in 1921, just months before the Race Massacre, and he marveled at the closed economy they had created with Black folks trading among themselves. You know, Du Bois, for example, marveled at the Dreamland Theater, owned by a Black woman, Lula Williams, and the fact that she was able to keep people coming to her theater, even though they had a white theater right across the street. You know, folks in Greenwood said, no, we want to serve our Black community, our Black businesses. And they really created something that was really gaining national admiration from folks like Du Bois. It's such a tragedy that what these folks had built was destroyed so savagely by white folks in Tulsa in 1921.
So we know some of the story about how a lie about a young Black man stole Greenwood away, but you get into some of the details of the land theft and the ongoing attack on Greenwood after the massacre. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, Joy, I think it's so important that people understand this is not just about a mob. This is not what happened to Greenwood is not just about nameless white men with guns going through the community. I choose to focus much more on institutions. You know, a lot of times I think people want to find a smoking gun that proves who was responsible for what happened in Greenwood in 1921. But we already have those smoking guns. You know, the smoking gun is the fact that the City of Tulsa Police Department deputized white people in Greenwood on the night of the massacre, handing them badges and stars to give them the authority to go and kill Black people. The smoking gun is the fact that when one white man in Tulsa walked into the police department, a police officer told him, get busy, get a gun, kill a Black person. The smoking gun is the fact that after the Race Massacre, real estate developers immediately launched a scheme to seize Greenwood land from Black people in that community. And so we already understand that there are so many institutions in Tulsa that were conspiring against Greenwood. And guess what? Those institutions are still here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Victor Luckerson. All right. You know, well, thank you all. I want to say thank you all for coming out on a 103-degree day on a Sunday afternoon. You could have been anywhere else in Dallas, but you decided to be here with us. This is an important conversation. Thank you for writing this book, by the way.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Victor and I have had several conversations prior for us meeting with you all today. I think my first question is going to be a little off the cuff. You could have written about anything else, any other subject. What was it about this particular subject in Tulsa that you just had to write a book about this?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Yolanda. Thank y'all all for being here. This is actually my very first book and my very first book tour, so it's very exciting to be up with y'all in Dallas. My second time ever in Dallas, so thank you for welcoming me here. And also thank you to the Mount Sinai Baptist Church for letting us use this facility. Really appreciate it. I should mention actually that the Christopher family, who are the ones who welcomed me into the church, they're members of Mount Sinai, and Charles Christopher's great-grandmother, Lula Williams, was actually a massacre survivor. You might have seen her in the documentary you were watching earlier about the Dreamland Theater. Their family actually owned the Dreamland Theater, and so that legacy lives on in this church, which I think is worth acknowledging before we really get into it. The question was sort of, how did I get into this? And really, you know, we've sort of had a lot of talk about the race massacre itself and the videos we've been watching, but that really wasn't my entry point to this. I was living in Atlanta as a journalist before working on this project, and this is about 5 or so years ago. I was having lunch with a friend, and the movie 12 Years a Slave came up, actually. A lot of folks here have probably seen that movie or heard of it. It's a very accomplished, beautiful, horrific movie about what Black folks experienced during slavery. And my friend had not seen the movie. You know, it was kind of one of the movies you're kind of like supposed to see, you know what I mean? It's one of those kind of movies. It's a quote unquote important movie. Right. And my friend said to me, I'm just really tired of seeing us brutalized in pop culture depictions as Black people. And so he just said, I don't want to see any more of us being slaves. I don't want to see any more of us under the boot of a policeman's neck, you know what I mean? And so I asked my friend, oh, have you ever heard of Black Wall Street? That's an example of us being successful. My friend had never heard of Black Wall Street. This was 2018, so that's before all these documentaries came out, before the Watchmen TV show came out, and it was just something that a lot of people my age, young Black folks, had no concept about. And so for me, it was really important to be able to tell that story, not just about the race massacre, those 2 days, but about this economic success, community success, this love the agreement cultivated over time. And so that's why the book is called Built from the Fires, because we want to go beyond just those 2 days and really explain what this community was in full.
So there are so many other communities just like Greenwood and Tulsa during that time. We're talking about 1921, and this was pretty impressive for 1921, whether you were white or Black, to be honest with you, with these thriving businesses that were just prosperous. I mean, talk about prosperity. When you look at, I looked at some of the archival footage, and I actually looked at the map and the, you know, block by block. I mean, there's a barbershop, there's a grocery store, there's a shoe shine stand. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Movie theater like the Williams family, you know. What was Greenwood like before the race massacre? Like, you know, in your maybe dollars and cents, tell us what it was worth.
Yeah. So really, it really was a true community. That's really what I wanted to highlight in my book. So I really want people to understand that everyone of every economic station was in Greenwood, and then that's something that really needs to be understood going forward. So you definitely have those entrepreneurs. Lula Williams, one of my favorite ones to study. So Lula Williams owned the Dreamland Theater, like I said, and a great little sort of fact about Lula is that she really had to advocate for herself. As a Black woman, no one wanted to give her respect of being an entrepreneur, even the other Black folks in Greenwood. So for example, Lula and her husband, John, bought this property to build the Dreamland Theater in 1914, right on Greenwood Avenue. All these newspaper articles start coming out, and they're saying, oh, John Williams, Negro Rockefeller, John Williams, the best entrepreneur in Greenwood. Lula's she's not even in the article. She's not even being mentioned. And so Lula said, I'm gonna do something about this. And so Lula actually went to the courthouse in Greenwood, signed an affidavit, and said, I, Lula Williams, own I own the stage, I own the seats, I own the projector. Yes. This is mine. He has his little garage over there, but this is my business.
So can I interject just a little bit? So Lula Williams, this woman had an agreement a contract with Hollywood. She was bringing blockbuster hits, whatever at that time in 1921, not only live, like vaudevillian type of performances on the stage. We're talking about anything that was running on a movie reel.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
showing in that theater.
Yeah, the film Cleopatra. So Cleopatra is
Yeah.
a silent film starring Theda Bauer, who's like a classic movie starlet of the 1910s. It was the most expensive film of all time when it was created in the 1910s, and it was screened at the Dreamland Theater as part of Lula's commitment to bringing the best and brightest films to that theater.
She had access to that, which is pretty incredible for 1921. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So that's just an example of one of the really most prominent entrepreneurs. But Greenwood was also a place, like any community, that had a lot of different types of folks in it. So, for example, there was a substance called chalk beer in Greenwood, and chalk was this alcoholic drink that it kind of like grapefruit juice, and it was just sort of like one of those like making your bathtub kind of drinks. You know what I mean?
Oh no.
And so they had they had an area called Chalk Alley in Tulsa, and that's where you would find some of the dive bars and some of the places where things were a little spicier in Greenwood. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that it was really a sort of a holistic place. I have a really small moment in my book that I really like where, so in Greenwood, they had the Tulsa Color School of Music. That was one place. And that's where they taught like classical music, and you learn how to play the violin, do all that kind of stuff. And then they had a place called the Crystal Cafe, and they played ragtime music there. And ragtime was like the rap of 1910s. It was like, you listen to ragtime, you're like a degenerate. Like, where's our culture going with this crazy ragtime? And so the ragtime guy and the School of Music guy, they had beef. They didn't like each other. And so that's a small moment in the story, but I brought that out in the book to illustrate that this is a community of a lot of different types of people with a lot of different interests. You know, Black people are not a monolith. And as I wrote the story, I really wanted to highlight that in the early Greenwood story for sure.
One of the things I wanted to point out that we were talking about people from Mississippi. My mom was born in 1939, and I used to often hear her talk about the Chicken Box Express. My uncles who left East Texas, but they went straight up, like probably with a McCann shoebox, and they probably got a slice of pound cake and a couple of pieces of fried chicken wrapped in wax paper. I see a lot of people smiling because they kind of remembered or heard somebody talking about that, but they were going up north for opportunity. So a lot of people were leaving Mississippi, coming to Tulsa by word of mouth from family members that this is where they needed to be and this was where everything was happening. I want you to talk about what actually happened right before the massacre. So we're talking about May 31st, that little window of time, and June 1st, 1921.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's kind of two parts to this question. There's the incident of the massacre, and then there's all the things that happened that preceded that incident, you know, because the neighborhood doesn't get laid to waste just because of one happenstance moment, you know. So the incident itself was that on May 31st, 1921, a black shoeshine boy named Dick Rowland was on an elevator with a white girl named Sarah Page. Dick Rowland and Sarah got on this elevator. The elevator lurches. Dick Rowland steps on her foot, grabs her arm. We don't really know what happened exactly. When the elevator opened, Sarah Page screamed. A white man observed all this happening, and Dick Rowland ran off. And so the story kind of emerges in white Tulsa, egged on by the white press, that Dick Rowland had attempted to rape Sarah. And so when this rape accusation comes out, he actually gets arrested on this false charge. He's in the courthouse, and this threat of lynching emerges, right? So a crowd begins to gather around the courthouse on the night of May 31st, 1921, white folks. And I should bring up the fact that before this night had happened, several folks had been lynched in Oklahoma already. A young black woman had been lynched in a nearby town called Wagoner just a couple years before that. And even a white man had been lynched in Tulsa.
Tell how old that woman was. How old was she?
Oh, she was about 16 years old.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and she was lynched in a town about half an hour drive from Tulsa,
A
Oklahoma.
teenager.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so this sort of mob mentality was very prevalent in Tulsa in the 1910s and 1920s. And so you had this crowd gathering around, potentially preparing to lynch Dick Rowland. But what they weren't prepared for or expecting was that Greenwood folks were not going to put up with that. So Greenwood had this independent spirit. It wasn't only about entrepreneurship, it was also about self-defense. There was a newspaper editor there named A.J. Smitherman, who I really love to follow, and his Tulsa Star newspaper would have a different headline every single week on the front page, like a different slogan every week on the front page. And one week the slogan was, "You push me, I'll push you." That was the mentality of Greenwood. So when Dick Rowland gets arrested, there's a rumor he's going to be lynched.
about 100 black men from Greenwood, some of them World War I veterans, marched to the courthouse, say, y'all got to give us Dick Rowland right now. We're not going to leave him with y'all. Talking to the police. The police refused to let Dick Rowland go. Black men and white men end up arguing over a gun. A gunshot goes off, and as I said in the video earlier, kind of all hell broke loose. And so, because these black men dared to go defend Dick Rowland, because there's a firefight afterwards in which black men and white men were shooting each other in downtown Tulsa, white Tulsa decided to burn Greenwood wholesale. They said, we could never let black people even imagine they could defend themselves or defend their people like that again. That's what this is really about. And so that the next morning after the May 31st incident is when white people gathered up kerosene, torches, matches, and they systematically burned almost every single building in Greenwood. They destroyed more than 1,200 homes in the neighborhood. If y'all seen the images, we just saw some of them, like they said, it looks like a war zone afterwards. And so it really was, I mean, it was a really horrific event, to have to sit with for years. You know, I spent years analyzing photographs, police accounts, witness testimony, and it was just a lot to dig into. But I think it's important for people to really grasp in an in-depth way exactly how it unfolded, because what happened there is one of the most horrific things that's ever happened on American soil.
So a lot of people don't understand when you are a journalist, when you're sitting with information like that and you're reading that, words have power, and you somehow absorb that as well, because you're having to go through all of that. I don't know how much help you had, but I know for me, voicing things when I'm voicing news stories, I'm reading that and I'm like, I have to sit with that, and it's not going anywhere. And it just, so chronicling that, did it affect you? I'm sure you had to step outside for a little bit, put yourself together, because that's a lot of information. And also you have to build this timeline. So there has to be some type of consistency, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
How did it make you feel going through all of that? Did it take a toll on you I mean, because I know how I personally feel sometimes when I have to do that. That is a little much.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. A lot of things were hard to process, and I would sometimes find really horrific facts in really mundane documents when I wasn't expecting it. So, for example, after the race massacre, so Greenwood gets totally destroyed June 1st, 1921, and sort of white Tulsa is really doing almost nothing to help. Like, the real estate men in Tulsa are trying to launch a scheme to take over the black land because it's near downtown and very valuable. The police department actually grabbed photographs. They confiscated photographs of the destruction, calling it propaganda, actually. And so that's sort of the environment that was going on, but at least the Red Cross actually was really helpful. So the Red Cross came in, and they actually provided a lot of really valuable aid to black Tulsans. The leader of the Red Cross, he was actually called the Angel of Mercy. That's what they called him in Greenwood. He did such a good job. And so the Red Cross, they issued a very detailed report about what happened. And so I spent all my time in the library in Tulsa. There's a library in Greenwood that I spent all my time at. And so I was going through the Red Cross report day after day, and you're finding all these facts, statistics. So that's where I got the number about 1,200 homes destroyed, about 200 businesses destroyed. And they also had information about fatalities in this report. And so I found out in this report about number of people that were killed, number of folks injured. But the most striking statistic they had in the report was that there were actually 8 stillborn babies during the race massacre. And so I was just in the library one day, and I found this fact that there have been 8 babies that were born premature, never had the chance to even get names. And that's a fact that I brought forward in the book, because to me that really signified how Greenwood had lost its past during the race massacre, where everything was destroyed, but it also lost its future, because these people didn't even get to live their lives. So many people were banished from the community. And so for me, that was definitely the most striking fact that I learned, something that I still have to sit with that, you know what I mean? So it's a big challenge for any writer, journalist, chronicler to take in all of that trauma and then try to present it to an audience in a way that gets to the truth of the matter, but also isn't exploitative, melodramatic, sensational. So often as black people, we're up there on the news, getting shot by police and being in these traumatic scenarios. I didn't want to create something that would only be about that, which is why when you read the book, the chapters about the race massacre are very intense and very traumatic, because that was what the event was. But there's also
love and joy and prosperity and happiness among these people too. So you have to find that balance, I think, when you're trying to depict people's true stories.
You know, over the years, I've never really knew the exact number. Were you able to confirm that? Because sometimes when I have Googled it, the number varies from report to report about how many people actually lost their lives. Do you know the exact number?
So there's really no exact number that's ever going to be known. Right after the race massacre, the Tulsa County Health Department said that 25 black people have been killed and 9 white people. So that's 34. So that's like the official number, quote unquote.
That's more than that,
Yeah.
than 34.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is you look at the newspaper the first day after the race massacre, they're saying hundreds of people killed. We still got to go look around for bodies. Like it's just, they're sort of acknowledging what we all know must have happened from looking at the photos. And then as you kind of see the legal ramifications of what's going to unfold, probably, that's when this number goes way down to 34. And so that's the quote unquote official number. However, historians, academics, experts estimate that up to 300 people were killed. But
Wow.
we'll never
Yeah.
have an exact number, though.
So that's a big difference between 34 to 300. So yeah, I just thought I'd like to throw that out there. I know I'm supposed to be objective here, but that just baffles me. Yeah. You know, you and I talked earlier about Luella and how she went and lived with different relatives after this. There is some type of psychological effect on folk who just lose everything overnight, can't do anything about it. I would like to talk about her, and you and I talking about how her handwriting changed over the years when she was writing different letters and different correspondence with different family members, and how something as small as that, not necessarily small, but just a detail that somebody picked up on, that her handwriting changed and that she had just grown so weary and was tired.
Right. So Lula, as I said earlier, was sort of she was called the amusement queen in Greenwood, actually, because she was so good with this theater. She actually had 3 theaters before the race massacre. So she was literally launching a movie chain at the time. Dreamland gets destroyed. Everything that Williams family owned was destroyed. And they actually were able to rebuild it. There's a great photo, actually, of the rebuilt Dreamland Theater, 1922, and that's so powerful. And actually, if you go to Greenwood today, they have these old buildings 2 old buildings that are still there, and one of them says Williams, 1922. So that's a really powerful image of their resilience. However, you know, a lot of times with black folks, we are put only in these kind of resilience narratives, and we're sort of expected to be Teflon, almost superhuman, in the trauma that we can survive.
Right.
But that's never been true. And so in the book, I also highlight a lot of the psychological challenge that Lula experienced after the race massacre. So Lula, you know, she tried to get money back from the insurance company. So she had policies out for her. They wouldn't give her the money. She tried to sue the city of Tulsa because the city of Tulsa empowered these police officers to deputize random white men to be part of the mob. The lawsuit was thrown out. So her and her family really struggled financially to rebuild after the race massacre. They had to close 2 of their other theaters besides the Dreamland. They ended up losing ownership of the Dreamland and went into foreclosure, essentially. And as all this going on, Lula's suffering more and more mental issues. Harder for her to walk up the stairs. Harder for her to remember what happened yesterday. And to your point, she started having to be transferred to different sanitariums and psychological wards and all this kind of stuff. And I'm so thankful to Charles, because Charles actually shared with me, Lula is Charles's great-grandmother. So Charles shared with me these letters between Lula and her son WD when WD went off to college. WD was a teenager in the race massacre and then went to college shortly afterwards. And so in these letters, she's talking about all the financial hardships that are going on with the theater, how hard it is to keep it open, how she's out there taking tickets now every night instead of being able to manage things. And I noticed in the letters myself, actually, that her handwriting was getting worse and worse. And so that really signified her mental decline. And so it was really, really difficult to write that. And I actually shared all that with the family before I put in the book. Because again, I'm not going to be the person who's out here exploiting that story or sort of giving people some kind of like weird titillation over that trauma. That's something that people aren't comfortable with who actually are the descendants of that. And so that was an example of something I actually shared with the family before I published it. But it was really important to me to highlight not only the success of Greenwood, but also all of the challenges that folks faced. And so you really learn a lot about Lula and her family's whole legacy when you dive into the book.
Yeah, wow. I want you to explain how racist policies persisted in Tulsa after the massacre.
So like I said, actually only part one of the book is about early Greenwood and the race massacre, and there's 2 more parts of the book after that. And so in the second part of the book, I explore sort of the rebuilt Greenwood. So Greenwood actually rebuilt even bigger and better than before the race massacre. There were more businesses, there were more people drinking chalk beer. You know, they were still having fun out there. But they had all these new forms of racist policy that were sort of undermining the community. And one thing I found interesting about that was that a lot of the racism before the race massacre, it was very localized. For example, the city of Tulsa passed a segregation ordinance separating black folks and white folks in 1916. And the race massacre itself was very like a local, local mob, local city folks doing stuff. But afterwards, like the federal government sort of like activates and starts having these really big ideas about how we're gonna like reshape cities. So in the 1930s, actually, Greenwood was one of the first red line communities in America. Which basically means that in 1935, a federal agent from the Homeowners Loan Corporation came to Greenwood. Theoretically, Homeowners Loan Corporation's job was to help people get out of the Depression, right? So the whole point of the organization was to help people get better mortgages, sort of save their houses, all that kind of stuff. But as part of the process for that, this agency decided to rate every single neighborhood in America on creditworthiness. And basically, as a matter of course, all black neighborhoods were rated D, which is the worst possible rating. It meant that it was hazardous to invest in these neighborhoods. And they drew actual maps. So I've seen the actual map of Tulsa, and they shaded the D-rated neighborhoods red. That's how we get redlining. That's where the term comes from, actually. That's an example of a racist policy that was created, not at the local level, but at the federal level. And once that's in place, that means that no matter whether you're trying to get a loan from a federal agency or from the bank down the street, they're all gonna know that you're like uncreditworthy, quote unquote, just because of where you live. And that made it much harder for Greenwood to rebuild over time, and really kind of leads into what happened later on, which is urban renewal, another big federal policy that again tried to reshape American cities in such a way that said that instead of saying hazardous, the word then was blighted. So now black neighborhoods are blighted in that time period. And so you kind of see over time that the federal government itself is also instituting these policies that are undermining Greenwood at every step.
Wow, that's a mouthful right there. My goodness, can we just sit with that information right there? Wow. Why did you want to bring, all this history all the way up, up to where we are now? And, there's some events in the book that are now even unfolding in 2023 right now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the book has the second part, which is in the mid-century period, and then there's a third part of the book that's basically part of like modern Tulsa. So after I had my lunch with my friend about 5 years ago and decided to write this book, I decided I needed to actually live in Tulsa to write this project. Like I knew that I couldn't really tell an authentic story about Greenwood without being among the people there. So I like packed up my life, I quit my job, I made a black country music playlist, and I drove all the way out west. Lil Nas X and Charlie Pride were both on there. So.
No, we got to rechange that. I don't think so.
So I've been living in Tulsa for almost 4 years and really capturing what's been going on there. And so I was in Tulsa when Donald Trump relaunched his presidential campaign in 2020. And so I was there with the protesters and people sort of dealing with how that was going to unfold. I was in Tulsa when George Floyd was murdered, and there were very large protests. A highway was shut down in Tulsa, as in many cities across the United States. I was there sort of chronicling that. And I was there when the 100-year anniversary of the massacre unfolded. And so that's when a lot of the national attention descended on the neighborhood. The documentary we were just watching came out in 2021. That was the 100-year anniversary. But for me, it was really important actually to follow the people who had been impacted by the race massacre. I wanted to be able to follow those family stories and how they were interpreting what was unfolding. So just as an example, I actually spent time with Charles and Lula Williams' descendants. They actually visit her grave almost every year.
Oh, wow.
And so I was there with them when they were visiting her gravesite on the race massacre, and sort of they were trying to themselves to process all that unfolded, all that she had suffered from. And so for me, it's really important to always center those actual people who lived through those actual events. This is not just like a history lesson for these people. It's something they actually had to live through, and also that they're still suffering from, because justice has never been served to anyone who survived Greenwood.
Wow. This subject of Tulsa has a lot of moving parts, and a lot of people in this country were never even introduced to the whole Tulsa thing, but some audiences were introduced through entertainment, like shows like Lovecraft Country, which was on HBO, and The Watchmen. And that's a little weird way to usher a subject like Tulsa into a TV show, and it makes it a little complicated. And you write about that in the book.
So did anybody in here watch Watchmen, Lovecraft Country? Okay.
Yeah.
A few folks.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it was interesting for me because I did actually enjoy the show. It was a very entertaining show. But that was actually my first time I sort of thought about, oh, like these people depicted on this show, because the show actually opens with the depiction of the Tulsa Race Massacre, like a fictionalized dramatization. And specifically, it opens with a woman in a movie theater playing the piano. So I watched that and I was like, oh, that sounds like Lula Williams to me, basically, you know. And so that was actually the first time I reached out to Lula's descendants, and they told me they had never even heard from the Watchmen people. You know, they had no idea that they were going to be sort of. I mean, it's a fictionalized account, but you can just kind of tell what they were trying to do. And so, in fact, one of the members of the family had actually, she was like a sci-fi fan. So she just wanted to see the new Watchmen. So she turns on the TV, and there's like her family basically being depicted in this horrific event. And so I actually got to talk to the creator of the show as part of my research. And he told me basically, oh, I didn't think it was appropriation because we didn't think of it as history. We thought of it as, you know, a story that we could tell. And so I think that's a challenge that Black folks often face. Like our personal history is just thought of as educational purposes or entertainment purposes for other people. I think it's very hard for us to claim ownership of our own story. And also I think it's really become a big business for Black history, you know what I mean? And so in the book, I sort of made a point to point out how Greenwood as a place has become the symbol, and how sometimes that symbol gets a dog figure attached to it, and now we've kind of lost sight of the true people who are at the heart of it. So again, I'm always trying to come back to who are the actual people who are impacted by this? What are they getting out of all this? What are they getting out of all this attention? And how can we recenter our energies back on those people?
Well, spoiler alert, if you ever see that episode on Lovecraft Country on HBO about Tulsa, the late Michael K. Williams, he tries to go back in time and try to change it and somehow prevent the Tulsa massacre. And I remember looking at that going, wow, it's a lot of stuff. It was a very heavy episode too. But I watched it. And like you said, you know, Hollywood gets involved with that and they get to tell their own stories, not necessarily the story. Right.
For sure.
What surprised you most about all of this in your research? Did you learn something new? Did you learn something new about yourself?
I did learn something pretty interesting about myself. So, like, I've been talking a little bit about chalk beer and the underworld of Greenwood. I became very fascinated by the underworld of Greenwood.
The chalk beer, really?
Yeah. So
that's about the fifth time you brought it up, so I guess so.
So I was interested in the underworld of Greenwood, and I started learning a lot about the numbers. So. Anybody in here? Oh, you're familiar with the numbers.
You said it too clean. You should say the numbers. He said the numbers. He put an R on the end of that. Did you hear? The numbers.
So the numbers was essentially almost like the lottery in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. You know, a numbers runner would come to your house saying, hey, which numbers you want to pick? And then the house would basically pick certain numbers a day. If you hit, you would get like 100 times your bet. And so one of these entrepreneurs who I was following through my story, he owned the Black newspaper in Greenwood, the Oklahoma Eagle, but he also ran the numbers. And I was like really surprised by that because I had thought about this guy being kind of an upstanding sort of civil rights figure. I was like, man, this is crazy. And so I always talked to my mom a lot about my research. And I would call my mom a lot what I was finding out. And I said one day, Mom, like, this is crazy. This guy that I thought of as this just like sort of wholesome figure, he also ran the numbers. And then my mom was like, oh, your granddaddy did the same thing. You didn't know that? And I was like, man, okay.
That was the lotto before it is now. Yeah.
But what I realized is that for a lot of Black families especially, there was no normal path to the middle class. You know, there was no red carpet, there was no ladder to get up there, and so you kind of got to get up there however you can. So I think a lot of families actually have a story similar to that, where there was something that was sort of demonized at the time that they were able to leverage in kind of an innovative way in a lot of ways, because like I said, the numbers. In around 1950 or so, the federal government again steps in. They passed this new gambling tax and essentially begin the steps of legalizing that kind of entertainment to become what is now the lottery. You know, so I actually found in a lot of my research that there were Black folks in Greenwood involved with like bootlegging is similar, right? Because bootlegging, like, oh, alcohol is being demonized and horrible and whatever. And these days, obviously, like Anheuser-Busch is like one of the biggest corporations in the world selling beer. And so I've tried to point out some of those moments. And they kind of remind me, actually, all of these remind me of today with like cannabis dispensaries. You know, marijuana obviously was very demonized for such a long time, and now it's becoming legal now that people can make money off of it. And so I really tried to follow some of those narratives about what are the things that in the past, you know, would have been something that would have been demonized, but today, you know, we just consider it a part of life.
Yeah. Victor and I were talking earlier. What I learned in this book was the term lily white. All of my life, I thought that was coined by folk in the African American culture. That was something that was coined by white folks. And I was very surprised by that. I did not know that. And here I am, almost 60 years old, and had never read it. Where did you find that information?
Yeah, so lily white, which I think people might even think of it as being like a poetic, like, oh, like it's so lily white, kind of pretty sounding. It's actually a political term. So let's say in the early 1900s, people may know that the Republican Party used to be heavily black, like a lot of black people were Republicans until about the 1930s. So there was a transition period actually when when the Republican Party was beginning to sort of turn against black people. This was like the early 1900s. And so there were kind of two halves of the Republican Party. There were the white Republicans who still supported black people and were saying, hey, we need to keep them in the party. They're valuable to our constituency, et cetera. And then there were the hardliners who were like, we don't want any black people as part of us. We want to pass Jim Crow laws, get them out of our party. And they were called the lily whites. You know, they were so lily white that they hated black people and wanted them out of the party. And so that's actually where the term comes from, lily white.
Blew me away when I found that out. I know a lot of people didn't know that. I know. What justice do you see for Tulsa moving forward? And let me piggyback and put a little something extra in there. Black History Month, 28 days, February, every year, we talk about almost the same staples in Black history: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mary McLeod Bethune, but this is something that's just as important. And I'm not saying to diminish the importance of those Black history figures, but I just see such a desperate need for something else to kind of flow through that we never talk about, that needs to be talked about. How do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, I think that all the attention in 2021 really did propel the knowledge of the race massacre to a different level. Like, how many folks in here heard about this in the last 3 or 4 years for the first time? Yeah, like a lot of people here. It's kind of rising the consciousness for so many folks. And that's going to change a lot about how this is perceived. I think, as an example, I have a teenage cousin. His name is Stanley. And when he was 14 years old in 2020, I actually hired him to work on the book with me. He was my research assistant, actually, on this book.
You needed one, I bet.
Yeah, he was one of several. And so Stanley, as a 14-year-old, got to learn about what happened in Greenwood. He got to learn about how black people experienced World War I and World War II. And it really I interviewed Stanley's going to Princeton, actually, in the fall, which is exciting. And I interviewed Stanley for an article a few months ago. And I was like, oh, first of all, you grew up. You're very mature now. You're a man. That's crazy. But also, he had sort of internalized almost a different, more complex understanding of America by learning that stuff, I think he really understood that, there are positive things about our history and negative things, and that understanding those negative things helps us to be better citizens. And so I think a lot of younger people are getting those lessons, and that's also part of why there's so much backlash against critical race theory, against teaching Black history in an authentic way. I think it's because of this fear that some people have that these young people are going to have a different mindset. It's not going to take them as long to wake up to what's going on in our country as it might have taken older generations to. You know what I mean? Because people like Stanley are learning about it as children, instead of later in life. And so I believe that in the future, the race massacre and Greenwood will be a much more normal staple of the Black History Month lessons. I think it's going to be one of those things that if you learn U.S. history, you learn about Civil War, then maybe it's Spanish-American War, then the Great Depression. But I think in the 1920s, we're talking about the flappers and all that stuff. I think we're going to be able to insert the race massacre in there and say, hey, this was going on too, and it's just as important.
Yeah. Well, this has been very enlightening, and we'd like to thank you, Victor. We'd like to open the floor up to anyone that has a question. I believe we have designated an area where they can walk to, Michael, and I'll probably give this handheld back to you.
If you love what you heard tonight, come on, let's give them a hand. Now, this time has been opened up to question and answers by you, the audience. And by the way, you look wonderful. Look really great. This young man over here is smiling, and many of you are. And the reason why I say that is because I want you to feel relieved. You know, a lot of times when you call on people, they're a little apprehensive and such like that, especially when I ask you to come down to this podium and speak on this mic. But do we have anyone that have any questions that'd like to come down and ask a question? If not, I will be happy to bring the mic to you. I will be there. Come on, man. Yes.
You mentioned Lovecraft Country, and I wanted to know, did you mention the Gap Band, since they named themselves after Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, and any other thing that you may want to point out to us in popular culture? I did go to the Centennial in 2021 because my mother was born in 1921, so anything related to 21, I'm going to be there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the question.
I'm going to tell you who that is right there. That is Emma Rogers. She used to own Black Images bookstore in Wynwood Village. Any type of book, magazine, anything that was hot off the presses. If your book, she would have had it right there in front with book signs. That's who that is right there.
Well, thank you so much for the question, Ms. Rogers. And from one book nerd to another, thank you for being here. So the Gap Band, as some people may not know, they're from Greenwood, and Gap actually stands for Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. Those are 3 streets that actually create the border of the neighborhood, and that's how they created their name. There's sort of a urban legend. I don't know if it's ever been proven, but they have this song called "You Dropped the Bomb on Me." That's one of their most famous songs. So people say that it's about Greenwood. It's like a coded message about the race massacre because airplanes were used to drop bombs on the neighborhood. In terms of if they're on the book, I do mention them a little bit, and actually, in the 1980s, when those 2 old buildings in the middle of Greenwood were preserved, Charlie Wilson came to like the opening. He did the ribbon cutting basically. Wow. So I have a little scene about that, which kind of shows they were like already very, very famous by the 1980s, but he was still coming back to Greenwood, doing stuff for the neighborhood, you know, being involved. So I thought that was really cool.
All right, we have another question from this gentleman here.
Okay. Hello, I'm Byron Williams. Hey, Victor. Hey. Just a little quick history. I met Victor 2 weeks ago. My family was having a family reunion in Tulsa, so we had a Black History or the Black Wall Street tour scheduled. So we had the opportunity to meet Victor, and I purchased his book. So, but I have a couple of things to say. First, my friend Denise Caldwell, she's native Pittsburgh, and her brother Milton, they live here in Dallas now, but they're very interested in the history. But she wanted to know specifically, did they really drop a bomb? Was it the federal government?
Sure. So it was not the federal government, no. As the race massacre was unfolding, there were several oil companies in Tulsa, and so there's one company called Sinclair Oil had airplanes already. And so there's actually a lot of kind of debate about exactly what unfolded, but one eyewitness account says that they used balls drenched in turpentine, and so they were dropping these balls all over the neighborhood, essentially to like exacerbate the flames, right? So the neighbor's already burning, they drop them in these turpentine balls, and it kind of causes the flames to explode even more. I should also say that before the race massacre, there was a lot of like anti-communist paranoia in Tulsa. Like the Red Scare was kind of that era. And so in Tulsa, white Tulsa, they actually are already doing aerial raids. They were doing these like exercises to say like, okay, if the commies invade Tulsa, we're gonna be ready with our airplanes. And so my sort of working theory is that when the race massacre happens, white Tulsa says, oh, we already had this plan for there was a quote unquote invasion and what to do. Let's roll out the blueprint and do that. So I think you kind of got to piece together the facts or whatever, but yeah, we do know from eyewitness accounts that airplanes were used to drop incendiary devices. Is the thing people usually say in the academic sphere about it. So.
Okay, and I just have a couple of more things. You guys you can tell me if I need to sit down. But I wanted to. Oh, okay. When you guys were talking, Victor, you you brought up the fact that 4 stillborn babies were
Oh yeah, 8, yeah.
what 8? Oh my goodness, 8 stillborn babies didn't make it the night of the massacre. Also, and you can correct me, wasn't it Booker T. Washington's prom night that same night? Was it?
Yeah, they were decorating for the prom.
Oh, they
yeah,
were decorating.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
That's
so,
right.
So that just tells you, these were thriving, normal communities doing, doing what people do around the world. Rites of passage.
Right.
For young people. So, this was a vibrant community. Also, I am from Oklahoma, as well as my friend Cassandra. She's from Ponca City, but she has a lot of relatives in Tulsa. But living in Oklahoma from age 0 to I moved in my late 20s out of Oklahoma. So I moved in 96, and I think I was 30 in 96. So I knew nothing about Black Wall Street. And I had relatives well in their 90s. I knew people at my church that were 100 years old. Nothing was ever said. And, although my family didn't live in Tulsa, Oklahoma City is only about an hour and 20 minutes south, southwest of Tulsa. So, that just tells you the magnitude of how these people were traumatized. I never heard anything about it until I read it in the magazine in maybe the late 90s. I think it was in the Ebony or Essence. That's how I found out. In addition, I think I mentioned Victor in Tulsa. Cassandra and I, we went to Oklahoma State with a young lady. Her last name is Makandishi. So Makandishi is not a very common name. So I was watching one of the documentaries on Black Wall Street, and sure enough, there's a survivor by the name of Makandishi. So even though we knew this young lady in college, she never shared this with us either. So it's just a lot of trauma associated with this, and it still lives on.
Yeah, no, there's a section in my book where I kind of explore that and sort of understanding why some Black folks would not want to continue sharing that story. I think there's a couple of things going on there. One really powerful quote that a descendant told me one time actually was that, obviously the goal in America is to have generational wealth as what you receive. Nobody wants to receive generational trauma. No one wants that. And so I think that a lot of times parents, they really don't want to hand that down to their children. This is like a much lower stakes example, but my parents, who are from the Jim Crow South, only told me a lot of things they experienced in the last few years as an adult. When I was a kid, they would never really explain to me all the things they experienced growing up in Jim Crow, Alabama. But only when I was an adult did they really want to start engaging with that topic with me. And so I think it's probably something similar going on with the race massacre survivors and their children and grandchildren, for sure.
And just one last thing, the question that I asked you when I met you a couple of weeks ago, I said, where did these people go? Like the hours, when things were still on fire, and when the sun came up, and when they had no homes to go to. Where did these people go? And you did tell me, and I did see on the video, there were some internment camps. But can you explain also about what you told me about the railroad and the trail?
Yeah. So afterward, there were so many people. This is like the hours after Greenwood's burning. The ruins are still smoldering. There were so many people walking just north on the railroad tracks. They look like ants walking down the tracks. That's a quote from a witness. So a lot of folks were just going north, just trying to see where they could go to get away from things. And then longer term, you found a lot of folks ended up in Chicago was a big location for massacre folks to be relocated to. I know the A.J. Smith, the journalist, went to Buffalo, New York, and lived there for the rest of his life. So they kind of ended up going. O.W. Gurley, who some folks who maybe heard a little bit about the race massacre may have heard that name. He went to Los Angeles, and so they really went kind of every single direction. But in the immediate aftermath, it was just kind of like get out. That was just the one sole goal. So
survival.
Exactly. Hey, Cassandra.
I have a lot of emotion. So when you talk about hearing stories like this and how they sit inside of you, so I'm going to try to put together a coherent question, but talk about wealth redistribution. And a lot of people get really upset about that, but I think it really depends on whose wealth is being redistributed. what I was impressed about, among a lot of things with Greenwood, my mom used to tell me going to Greenwood, seeing Tina Turner and Ike, she'd tell me those stories. She didn't tell me the story of the massacre. They rebuilt, even though they wouldn't sell them lumber. And, this just shows the resilience and the fortitude of Black people. They rebuilt and it was even better than before. But then the redlining and the highway going through the center of it, and then we were able to shop in North Tulsa at a white mall. I mean, all of that is really the downfall. What concerns me today is that as they're rebuilding that area with the museum, those buildings are now owned by non-Black people. And the Black people, I think, are renting from them. So this redistribution of wealth, can you kind of speak to that?
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's another major theme of the modern part of the book, gentrification by various forms, more or less. And so I think Tulsa has a really big problem in that there's a lot of hollow symbolism about the race massacre. Some of it's not even hollow, some of it's very powerful, but that's kind of like where the line of atonement stops. It often stops at symbolism. And so if you go to Greenwood today, you walk around, you'll see there's a lot of new high-rise apartments that are white-owned, to Cassandra's point. There's a baseball stadium that was built in Greenwood, a minor league baseball stadium, to the protest of a lot of Black residents. But when you actually walk on the sidewalks, you'll see all these plaques, and the plaques actually denote destroyed businesses. So you'll literally see like Susie Bell's Cafe destroyed in 1921, never rebuilt, in front of the baseball stadium. And so I think that really should demonstrates how in Tulsa's mind, they're saying, well, we gave you these plaques, we gave you these statues, y'all got a little park, like we've done our part on this whole thing, And then there's a lot of controversy about the new museum, in fact, actually, which is called Greenwood Rising. And in some ways, it's kind of the culmination of this dynamic, because it's like a very expensive and sort of like well-done museum, but the city of Tulsa and philanthropists basically spend a lot of time raising about $30 million in corporate donors, philanthropy. The state of Oklahoma kicked some money in, and they raised $30 million to build this really nice museum. But at the same time, there's been no reparations for massacre survivors, and the city itself has actually been fighting a reparations lawsuit. So they were simultaneously gassing up this museum while in the courtroom saying, we don't want to give these survivors a dime. And so I think that hypocrisy is really evident when you go to Tulsa, and it's something that I really kind of try to expose a little bit in the modern part of the book. So thank you for asking that question.
Okay. All right, Victor, we have another question here.
During the riots and everything, the bodies, the people that died, where were they buried?
So that is something that the city is trying to investigate right now. There are a couple of sites. The sort of site that's become a really big tension point is, it's called Oak Lawn Cemetery near downtown Tulsa. And so the city of Tulsa for the last about 4 years now has been going on a sort of a search for bodies in the cemetery. And they've hired like archaeologists and experts and historic experts to sort of figure out where in the cemetery the bodies are buried. So they've done several excavations. So far, they've exhumed about, I think, 60 bodies or so.
In mass graves?
Mass graves, right. They're buried in mass graves. And so they've been doing some DNA testing on the bodies. They have not yet confirmed any of those bodies are from 1921, but these DNA tests may yet prove that.
Okay. The riot, the bombing on May 31st, 1921, that was a Tuesday. So evidently this was cooked up over joy juice over the weekend, and it lasted Tuesday and Wednesday. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing, how old was Lula? Maybe Charles can answer that question in 1921.
She was roughly 40 years old.
40 years old.
Roughly about that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, she was too young for her handwriting to change, so something changed in her.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The other question was, you said Sinclair Oil had the planes?
That's right.
Yeah, they were also known as the SOBs, Sinclair Oil Bunch. I worked for an oil company at one time.
Oh, wow, okay.
The other thing, did you ever compare 1921, the bombing, to 1929, the crash of 1929? where a lot of people lost jobs. I mean, lots of people. They lost their homes, they lost their businesses, and the land turned to dust, the Great Dust Bowl. You ever look at the correlation there?
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book actually about.
Thank you. And my name is Sharon Cornelius.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, there's a chapter in my book about the Great Depression in Tulsa, and what I found out in my research was that that whole like last hired, first fired dynamic that Black folks experienced was very evident during the Great Depression in Tulsa. So a lot of Black folks in Tulsa were domestic workers, maids and servants and those kind of jobs. And so when the wealthy white folks lost their money because oil was going down and all that, they sort of ended up laying off a lot of domestic workers in droves. And that really disrupted the Greenwood economy, because the Greenwood economy was actually driven by the maids. They had a day in Greenwood called Maids Day Off, actually. So on Thursdays, all the maids got the day off, and they would come to Greenwood to shop and hang out and do that. And so, if all the women are going to be there, the men are going to be there too. And so that really is kind of what kept the economy flowing in Greenwood. But when the maids lost their job, they couldn't spend as much money, and the economy really stalled out. Another thing that's really negative about what happened for them, though, is that, as I mentioned earlier, there was this group, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, sort of helping with the New Deal type stuff. But in Tulsa, a lot of the local, like Salvation Army and those kind of groups, they actually refuse to help Black people, or they help Black people in like way smaller ways than white folks. So Black people, they're really kind of on their own during the Depression, trying to get their way out of it. And that's one reason I think that the numbers really important, because this numbers gambling economy was actually like thriving and continuing, even as the government wasn't really giving folks the aid they needed. So that goes back to sort of the numbers being an actually important part of the economy, and not just sort of this thing to be demonized.
Vic, tell the little bit story about the lady who had the Black maid, and it was one lady had a white maid. So she would help the white maid clean, but when the black maid came, she got it. Remember that?
Yeah,
There's a story in there about that.
There was somebody of the era actually interviewed a lot of white and Black Tulsans about their thoughts about race, more or less. And a white woman who had multiple maids said that she would sort of feel an impulse to help the white maid she had.
Because she
sometimes.
felt sorry for her.
Yeah, but then when she had a Black maid, she would not feel that impulse. She would never help her.
Never help.
So, that was really interesting insight.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
thought that was interesting too. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question here.
What do you want know about what I've read that the current governor of Oklahoma is trying to, I'm going to use the term whitewash the Tulsa riot and take race out of the teaching in the schools?
Yeah, so that's been a really big ongoing controversy, I guess I would say. So this entire anti-critical race theory controversy that's been going on the last few years in America, Oklahoma actually passed one of the very first laws that was sort of against critical race theory in early 2021. It was actually just a few months before the centennial of the race massacre. And so that caused, at that point, actually, the governor was kind of saying, well, yeah, we passed this law, because the law in Oklahoma specifically says that students should not be made to feel discomfort by anything regarding race in class. And that's a really vague thing to say, because, that was pretty discomforting what we watched up there, you know what I mean? And so what's actually gone on so far in Oklahoma is that because the law is so vague, people who are against teaching about race or against learning about diversity or diversity training, they've been able to use that really vague law to basically threaten public school systems. So the Tulsa public school system actually got basically a warning towards probation, because one teacher said that she didn't want to do diversity training. So diversity training violates this law we have now. And the State Department of Education gave them a warning. They said, don't do that. And so that's been going on. And also we have the Department of Education secretary in Oklahoma named Ryan Walters. He's actually the person who said about 3 or 4 weeks ago, he was asked about whether the race massacre sort of fit the mold of critical race theory, which he hates. And he said that, essentially he said that race wasn't the main factor in the race massacre. And that was that was a super viral quote that went everywhere in the media a few weeks ago, because it was kind of an absurd thing to say. But it really illustrates how this real fixation with whitewashing history, to your point, has sort of led some of these politicians into almost like tongue twisters, right? They can't even get the words out of their mouths that the Tulsa Race Massacre was racist. They won't even say that, because it sort of undermines this house of cards they built up, saying that, our country is being radicalized by books like mine, And so I think it's really important for folks to continue to really tell true history. I think there's going to be even more efforts, I think, to get rid of it. So it's incumbent upon us to really acknowledge what's going on in our country, both good and bad.
We have one more question.
Hi there. My name is Reginald Lofton, and my father's from Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, to be exact. And my family, we learned about Black Wall Street when we was young. But in Oklahoma, we was told that you're not allowed to speak about it because you would get in trouble. That's why you found a lot of the older generation didn't speak about it, because once that was implanted, that they knew not to talk about it. Okay, that was number one. And you familiar with J.C. Watts?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, when he was congressman or senator at that time, he fought very hard to make sure that to keep it a secret as well, and also to make sure that nobody received anything. And even to date, as it is right now, I understand evidently it's still going down and so forth. Is that something that you ever interview him or talk to anybody in those congressmen, senators, and those guys, or why that they chose not to fight so strongly against it? Something that clearly you can see that it happened and it was real and it was totally unnecessary.
Yeah, so my experience so far with sort of what the congressmen have been doing is, again, it kind of goes back to that symbolism issue, that they're willing to sort of like represent the race massacre or honor it to a point. So for example, right now, one of the U.S. senators for Oklahoma is a man named James Lankford. And so James Lankford was actually on this riot centennial commission that the city had. So he was sort of giving his credibility to the idea that we need to acknowledge the race massacre and make sure everyone knows his history, right? 2021 rolls around. First of all, James Lankford was actually the congressman up there at the dais in the Senate chambers talking about we need to roll back the election results when the mob entered the Capitol. Like, if you go watch the footage, that guy with the red hair is James Lankford, who was like, "Oh my goodness, like they're here." So he was part of that cohort who was saying we don't want to honor the election results, first of all. And then when this anti-critical race theory bill came up in Oklahoma, basically Lankford ended up resigning from the Centennial Commission because the people on this commission were saying, "Yo, guy, you need to like represent us as Black people in Greenwood and say we don't agree with this bill." But he would not do that. And so that's the example of somebody who was ostensibly for supporting rat massacre survivors and descendants, but when sort of push came to shove, he actually ended up resigning from this commission that was sort of about honoring those people. So there's been a lot of hypocrisy like that, I think, which kind of maybe mirrors what you're talking about with J.C. Watts.
Even at 23, that they choose to be that afraid to tell the truth or represent the truth as a congressman or a senator or anybody representing a state.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly really think it's about, I think America, in some ways, America kind of needs to uphold a very specific narrative about progress, I think. And what you learn when you're a kid is that, we had these great ideals in the American Revolution, and then we solved the race issue with slavery, and then we kind of solved it the last time with the Civil Rights Movement, and now we're good. And that's kind of the arc you learn when you're a kid. And so the Tulsa Race Massacre really disrupts that arc, because we're supposed to be going from here, getting better, getting better, getting better. But that's what's going on. How is it that these folks had a thriving neighborhood in Greenwood and it totally burned to the ground? That's not progress. That's the opposite of that. And so I think that's why there are so many folks who are sort of vehemently opposed to telling this true history, because it disrupts what we're supposed to understand about who we are as Americans.
So when he stepped forward, he stumbled and he brushed up against her. And he said he's sorry. And then all of a sudden, the fact that a Black man brushed up against her, she was got excited or whatever. And that's the reason why he was arrested, because all he was doing is trying to go to a bathroom, which was in the basement, okay, that building downtown.
Oh yeah, yep. That's how the narrative I've learned as well. Yep.
Hi, I'm Terry. I apologize for being late earlier, but a couple mentions about the documentary that was watched. I was wondering where could I find it and what it exactly was.
It was a CBS. I know CBS News aired it, so that was a Gayle King production. I'm not sure exactly where, if it's on YouTube. I think Charles would know though. Charles is the one who found that, so he can tell you.
You probably can just Google CBS Gayle King, Tulsa, and it'll pop up a link, I bet you, on YouTube or, yeah. Did anyone else have a question?
How you doing? My name is Tony Fain, and I'm actually from a small town in Oklahoma by the name of Tatum, Oklahoma. And I've been knowing Charles for since college. So I'm very familiar with the Lula Williams story, and I commend you on doing what you're doing. This is something that really needed to be done a long time ago. So I definitely congratulate you with this. Also, I was wanting to ask you, are you familiar with, a lot of people talk about why the race riot happened, but they don't understand there's a underline behind the race riot. Tulsa, Oklahoma, is the Black Wall Street area was located in the center of the universe. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a lot of oil and gas that runs under the land that Black Wall Street exists on. And that's something that no one talks about. But what actually happened is the bank in Black Wall Street was getting ready to start doing business with Africa. So they were getting ready to get their oil and, their money back by gold and oil. So that's what disrupted the whole program, and that's something that a lot of people don't know about. But I like what you guys are doing, and I hope this continues to spread across the country. And I'm also doing the Black Wall Street Expo around the country, so I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit later on. But
Okay,
I
that
definitely
sounds
commend
great.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely know that oil was obviously a huge resource in Oklahoma, and that a lot of those sort of oil-bearing types were very interested in owning the Greenwood land. Like I said, it was really near downtown Tulsa, and so there was a lot of talk even before the race massacre about turning it into an industrial site to be used by white Tulsa. And so there's certainly like a motivation there to see like how can we get rid of these folks. So I think the exact sort of like details of how the massacre was orchestrated are a little bit lost to time, but we do know about like very, very clear motivations that would have been in place long beforehand that could have motivated sort of planning an attack like that.
Yeah, that was the match, was the elevator incident, but the gas was already there.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people are not familiar with, but people, the research that I've done, and I had, and that's something that I've always asked myself. I'm like, I know it couldn't have been just racism, but at the end of the day, a lot of those insurance companies that were actually handling the policies of those businesses that were there, no one ever paid up from the insurance standpoint. And I know those policies were good, but they stated that there was no race riot insurance in the policy. Right.
Yeah, that actually happened to Lula Williams' family in particular, and the book kind of outlines what happened to Lula trying to fight for her insurance payout and not receiving it.
Right, but from what I understand, they declassified it as a massacre rather than a race riot, from what I understand. So if it was a massacre, those policies should still be in effect because it was not a race riot. But I just wanted to share that, and congratulations on what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
All right, we have one more question, and then we're going to give you advice on how we're going to move forward.
Good evening. My name is Carl Morgan, Carl Ed Morgan, I'm sorry. Ed with E-D-D. My mind is not too clear.
It's all right.
You have to forgive me, I can't think like normal people. But when I thought of the word bomb, and I heard you say how they bombed that place, which was true, and you don't hear many people talk of that. We also had a bombing here in Dallas not too many years ago where 5, I believe, policemen got killed. We went to bed thinking that there was a European that was shooting the people that were protesting or whatever downtown. We wake up in the morning and found out that they had blowed up a Negro, African American, or whatever, young man. But you never hear too much about a city as mature, a country that's as mature as this, blowing up an individual. There again, we have this secrecy with an advanced black race or whatever you call us. We never talk about that. So I want to ask you this particular question. What is it that some of those people, not all, I used to be a repairman, so I know there's some very good people on all sides. I learned a lot through them. But what is it that they have against us? Why?
Thank you for the question, sir. That is a big question. I think there's a couple of things going on. I think fear is a big motivation. When I think about the race massacre itself, there is a deep-seated paranoia that black folks in Tulsa were going to rise up against white Tulsa. That was actually what this paranoia was, that one day the black people in Greenwood were going to get their guns, walk over to white Tulsa and try to invade. And so I think, where does that fear come from? I think it might come from guilt, right? Because if you think about how our country was founded and all the trauma black people have been forced to endure, then it stands to reason that some people, white people, might think that, oh, like, something's coming, right? There's gonna be a repercussion for all of this. And so I think that there's a fear and a guilt kind of mingled, which creates a really deep-seated paranoia about black people rising up, basically. That's certainly what's going on in Tulsa. I know for sure that there was a lot of paranoia about a quote-unquote Negro uprising, which is why they were so ready to attack when these black men with guns came into white Tulsa to defend Dick Rowland.
We have one more question. We have, our time is expiring and we have to move on, but we want to, you the one that wants to ask the last question? Okay.
Thank you I'm looking forward to reading the book. First of all, how long did Black Wall Street exist before 1921? And what's amazing to me is that people stayed in Tulsa after that. I mean, there were people, I would have been one of the people walking north, but the idea that these people have stayed there for generations and tried to rebuild is amazing. So I just wondered how many of the people did stay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. So Greenwood was organized or originated in 1905. A man named O.W. Gurley came from Arkansas, a black entrepreneur. And so, like I said, downtown Tulsa was already kind of becoming the oil capital of the world. They first discovered oil in 1905 in Tulsa. And there was just like low-lying land that nobody really wanted just north of downtown. And obviously, that's often where black folks go to kind of create their prosperity. And so that's where he opened a grocery store called the People's Grocery Store in 1905. So 1905 was the origin date. And in terms of how many folks stayed afterwards, I don't have an exact number for you, but I do in the book focus on a lot of those families that stayed. You know, you have the Williams family stayed. So even after Lula suffered her challenges, her son, W.D., became a high school teacher, actually, in Greenwood. And so he actually was one of the people who really chronicled that history first. Like, a lot of times, people like me or the Watchmen people, journalists, media types, they get all the credit for chronicling the story, sharing the story, but really it's the local people who do the work. And so W.D. Williams, Lula's son, he had taught yearbook, actually, at the black high school. And so in the yearbook classes, he would actually bring out photos and sort of evidence of what had happened. And a lot of folks, like in 1950s Tulsa, a lot of black teenagers had no idea that the neighborhood had ever been burned. And so really owe somebody like W.D. a lot of credit for being able to preserve that story when no one else really cared about it. So that's just one example of somebody who stayed, and because they stayed, that's why we know about all this today.
Excellent. Would you please stand and give these young people a standing ovation? All right. In my hand is your book. This is your book, and it's in the fellowship hall waiting for you. We have book signing there as well by this author here. We want to again thank Ms. Yolanda Williams for being our special guest. Thank you, Mr. Victor Luckerson, for creating such a dynamic book that we're going to learn a little bit more. What I love about the book is that it gives you an insight on the people that were affected by the book, affected by the massacre as well. Do we have any announcements from Ms. Cassandra?
Yes, while you are visiting with the author
All right, treats and a book.
Before we leave, can we thank Victor for being courageous, for putting a book together like this? And we're asking God to cover him in prayer and safety and all of those things, because it takes a lot of courage to put all this information together in 2023. We thank you very much, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.